Morgan, I just made you a co-host too, so sorry you didn't have that functionality just prior to that.
Cover your eyes so you don't know the secret. I've been trying to hide. We held our breath to see our names return. On the wreck of 86, that was the year I knew the panic was over. Yeah, since we found out that anything could happen, 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 anything. I know it's gonna be, 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 I know.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Jean West in Louisville, Kentucky, proud member of the board of directors for the Muhammad Ali Center here in Louisville. And we welcome you to our event this evening. A word a bit about the Ali Center. You know, the 8th annual Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Awards were originally scheduled for last week. It was on the 24th, but unfortunately we had to cancel them this year due to COVID. But that doesn't stop the Ali Center from our mission in promoting the 6 core principles of Muhammad Ali: confidence, conviction, dedication, respect, giving, and spirituality. This online program is part of the Center's I Am America Racial Justice programming series. It is called I Am America to reflect one of Ali's famous quotes. Muhammad once said, "I am America. I am the part you won't recognize, but get used to me. Black, confident, cocky. My name, not yours. My goals, my own. Get used to me." This series is designed to explore the most pressing racial justice challenges of the day and to offer critical analysis of the history and intersectionality of social justice issues. We hope to also explore or offer action steps for those wanting to create social change. Later on in the program, you will be hearing from Erin Herbert here, Director of Programming at the Ali Center, about some of the Center's other virtual programs. Plus, I also want to let you know about a brand new temporary exhibit at the center right now called Truth Be Told: The Policies That Impacted Black Lives. It is an amazing and impactful exhibit that everyone should see. And there's more information about it on the Ali Center's website. Truth Be Told will be on display through April 18th, 2021. So come and visit if you can. Now, we're here to talk about a book. A quick summary about the book: For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. This beautiful book by Michael Waters and illustrator Keisha Morris offers an honest, intimate look at one family's response to racism and gun violence and encourages hopeful forms of activism and advocacy. The picture book includes a discussion and activity guide by the Muhammad Ali Center, and a portion of the publisher's sales proceeds will be donated to nonprofit organizations that facilitate the empowerment of Black communities. The book is now available for purchase where books are sold and is ideal for children between the ages of 6 and 10. We also want to tell you that we are going to be having a book giveaway tonight. So 5 attendees from tonight will win a free copy of For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. And I will announce the winners after our conversation topic. So now, tonight, all about the book. Let's look at this trailer. is a beautiful book. So joining us tonight are Michael Waters. He's the award-winning author, activist, professor, and pastor, a sought-after speaker to national and international audiences. He's a frequent social commentator for major media outlets and named one of America's emerging leaders by Ebony Magazine. He has received many honors for his work in peace and justice. He lives in Dallas, Texas. That's where he joins us tonight. Keisha Morris grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, studied illustration in New York City, and now tells stories through pictures and words in Reno, Nevada. She's a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. She's joining us now from Las Vegas. Erin Herbert is the Director of Programming at the Muhammad Ali Center, where she is responsible for the creation, development, and evaluation of education initiatives for local, national, and global audiences. She will be sharing some information with us later on some of the exhibits that are going on now at the center. And then Daryl Young Jr. is the manager of programming at the Muhammad Ali Center, where he oversees youth initiatives, cultivates strategic community partnerships, and produces programming, heavily involved in various causes and organizations, including the Cities United Initiative, the National Black Male Achievement Movement, and Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity. And Daryl lives in Louisville. We want to apologize and thank you for being able to rejoin us this week, as we had to cancel last week. And we will have, that will be part of our discussion. As you know, last week on this day, the outcome of the Breonna Taylor case was released in Louisville, and there, as in many cities across the country, was quite a bit of reaction to that. So our director, Donald Lazare, thought it best that we postpone last week's event to tonight. So I want to thank you for adjusting your schedules to join us. So let's start this conversation. Michael, your book, let's talk about Jeremiah. He's your son. And the whole premise of the book is him asking you questions as a young child. Let's start there.
Well, yes, and first let me again say her name, Breonna Taylor, and commit ourselves to bringing forth justice for that family. But let me also mention that my son, who's now 14, I go on record as saying that he's the most beautiful Black boy I have ever seen. Rested my heart immediately as he was born. And my great desire as his father was to make sure that I could provide him, alongside with my wife, his mother, everything that he needed in order to live successfully. But I was also immediately struck by the fact that navigating the world as a young Black man is fairly perilous, and has been true for some time. And began to awaken to that reality along with my son as he gained awareness, began to observe the world, particularly what was going on in the media. I'm one who is often reading newspapers, searching the web, watching the news, and he would be right by my side. And I'll never forget one particular incident where he was playing with a toy truck on the carpet in front of the television. And playing out on the scene behind him was a gentleman in Georgia who was getting ready to be executed. Despite the cries of the Pope and international community, and despite the fact that many of the persons who initially went on record accusing of the crime had recanted their statements, he was still put to death. And I was mindful, once again, with that image of my son and in the backdrop, what was happening on television, of just how perilous the experience of Black people, the African diaspora, particularly in this country, and young Black people can be. And as he gained awareness, he began asking questions, which is fairly normal. Children tend to explore the world through their inquiries. But I was really impacted by the weight of the questions, wanting to know why these incidences of racial violence and gun violence continue to happen. And not only from like a distance from what he saw on the news, but given the work of my wife and I in the community, how those things began to press even upon our family. And so at the one particular incident, his questions to us were very piercing. And on a flight to Los Angeles, those words reverberated again. And before I knew it, we were taking pen to paper. And I turned to my wife and I said, I think we have something here. And that began us on a journey, on an odyssey to where we find ourselves tonight.
I want for our attendees, you can participate in this. Use your chat feature, and I want you to know that this is a safe place to ask questions and to give us input and ideas because an interactive community. We're all in this together, so it takes a village. So on your chat feature, just go ahead and ask a question. If you want me to say your name and where you're from, that's fine. If you're a little bit shy about asking a question that you think might be a little sensitive, just send it to me directly and I will ask it anonymously. Okay, so go ahead and start asking your questions. Um, Michael, let's talk about the book. It starts with him with his hair, pretty much, and you use his hair as kind of a metaphor. Tell us about that.
Well, again, a story right from our own experience. Literally happened. My son wanted to grow locks and inquired whether he can do that. And in a very whimsical, childlike way, assumed that it could happen overnight. And we had then to provide the instruction that, yes, you can. We have no problems with you taking that journey. I thought it was an act of self-determination as a young child, of identity. This was something he wanted to do, had observed others. This is something I wanted to do. We were all for it. But then by saying, it's going to take some time and you're going to have to keep it up. You're going to have to comb it through, My hair has long betrayed me, but I used to have locks and some other things at one point. So I knew a little bit about the journey he was going to engage in. And so, that became a part of his daily ritual. He would check in the mirror, he would check its growth. But, as writing this book, it was interesting to parallel the growth of his follicles to his growth in wisdom and knowledge and understanding of the world. And so I think it provided a very unique accompaniment to the story. I think Ms. Morris has done a phenomenal job in presenting the story in picture form, and you can help and observe. It helps to observe that growth throughout the book. If he appeared on camera now, and who knows, he may pop in here at some point before we're done, they'd stretch all the way down his back. And to me, it's a part of his continued growth and a continued advancement in our continued conversations of what we see and experience.
Okay, Todd in New York wants to know how old your son was when you wrote the book.
Oh, goodness. Jeremiah so he's 14 now. And when I began writing, he was 10 and 11, about 11 years old. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So over the course of 4 years. Keisha, the illustrator, these illustrations are just beautiful. What did you have in mind when you talked with Michael about the book as it concerned the look of it?
I actually didn't talk to Michael. I think the other day was like the first time that we actually met. I got a little bit of feedback from him through our art director and our editor. But for the most part, it was just kind of how did I see this story? And that's kind of how I put the illustrations together. My art director, Allison Taylor, she saw a portrait that I had done of LeBron James on my website. And she said that there was something in that portrait that felt like that was the look of the book. And so with that, I just kind of took that as reference and, created characters off of reference that I got of Michael's family and just kind of went from there.
Your hometown is Charlottesville, Virginia. That Charlottesville, Virginia. What give us some perspectives on your hometown as you look at it now?
As I look at it now, I remember when everything happened in Charlottesville a few years ago, and I sat the whole day just watching it on television in disbelief. I grew up on sort of the outer skirts of Charlottesville, so I wasn't really in the city part of Charlottesville. But I never really experienced, I guess, what I saw on television that day. There were a few things that might have happened here and there, but I never felt how I felt that day watching all of the things happen on television. And that made me scared for the people that I still know there, and that made me scared for my family that still lives there. So for me, watching that and seeing that, and then also growing up there, it just felt just like a different place.
Did that inspire you in your illustrations for this book at all?
A little bit. I mean, mostly I thought about my family. I thought about my younger cousins. I thought about my littlest cousin, Daraja. Um, I thought about him a lot while I was doing this book, because I feel like you have to add like emotion to it. You have to attach it to something so that when you're doing the illustrations, you can kind of keep going, even if it gets a little bit too heavy. And for me, thinking about this as a great resource for them, that just is what kind of pushed me to keep going and doing the illustrations, and just kind of like putting a little bit of light on the topic.
So, Michael, you start with with Jeremiah, who's your son, talking to him about Michael Brown, and the book ends well too soon, right? I think we ended with who was the last we have had since then, Breonna Taylor, and I'm sure in Dallas, I would imagine there have been protests as well as Louisville and across the country about that case. He's 14 now. What is he talking to you about now, in light of the newest current events?
The true horror of this experience is the fact that 1 in 1,000 Black men and boys in America will be killed in a police encounter. That so many young Black men are killed in a police encounter that for young Black men between the ages of 25 and 29, it's the 7th leading cause of death. So the reality we must wrestle with is, while we know a few of the names that have reached national and international prominence and a few of the names that are included in the book, this is a regular experience, and it extends well beyond this time period. I'm often mindful to say that Dr. King himself, and that I Have a Dream speech, or the speech we now refer to as I Have a Dream, we always focus on the tremendous climax of that moment, and the buildup in the body of the speech. Dr. King says, and I'll paraphrase, that Black people in America will never be free until they are freed from the stain of police brutality. We know in our nation that the very origins of policing happened in slave patrols. The idea that apprehending Black bodies is a part of our national history. And so this is just the next iteration of that experience. I think the only thing that we see happening now is that all of us have access to the world through the advent of technology, right? And I'm mindful of the fact that the information we received concerning Breonna Taylor is given on the anniversary of the trial of Emmett Till, or the killers of Emmett Till, and how they were likewise not found guilty in that crime, right? And so again, these harms have been perpetuated for quite some time. And so I knew, and this is a painful yet important recognition, that whenever the book was released, it would be timely, because we are simply buying our time between experiences. And my prayer is that this book will help us push forward the needle to where we can really begin some true systemic change, so these harms are not revisited. I mean, we know the names that have kind of risen to a certain height: Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. But I could talk about lesser known names in our community whose lives were just as precious, whose families were denied justice, and that justice is still something that we long for. And so that's something we have to acknowledge, that, you know, the great James Baldwin said, to be Black and American and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all of the time. And why is that the case? Because these harms are perpetual. So again, the book stops, but it doesn't stop. It ends with the expectation, unfortunately, that these harms will continue, but it also ends, I believe, I pray, with the hope that if we lean into the work, we can make for a better world.
Renee from Maryland is asking, Dr. Waters, now that your son is a teenager, have you considered a book for teenagers, a sequel perhaps?
You know what? That's a good suggestion. We'll pray about it. We'll see. I never fancied myself a children's book writer. That's nothing that I aspire to. I've written some adult nonfiction books and had particular interest in that, had some manuscripts, was working on publishing a dissertation, but the necessity of the issues surrounding my own family and the questions of not just now my son, but also our daughters now really push forward the need for this book. And to be honest with you, as I looked around personally, I didn't later see a resource such as this. And sometimes, need gives you the inspiration to create. And so I will say that I will not call it a joy, but I will call it a level of gratitude. I was at least thankful that in this recent incident with the failure to indict with Breonna Taylor, that the book was available, that there were persons, families who had already begun to engage it, and maybe for the first time had something readily available that they could pull off the shelves and sit and share together with their children. And so that did give me a sense of hope and a sense of gratitude that providentially now this resource is available to the masses.
The book also has an instructor's guide, a teacher's guide. Daryl, why we're hoping this book is in schools? Why was it necessary to include that in the book?
So first off, in the vein of Dr. Waters, I want to mention Breonna Taylor. I also want to bring up David McAtee as well, another person who whose life was at the hands of armed officers, in this case, the National Guard. When we talk about the issue of having this book in schools, I think it's vital and necessary that we really understand what racism actually is. I think even adults, right? We're talking about a children's book, but I think even adults have a very infantile understanding of what racism is, right? I think for a lot of folks, racism is this idea of a set of words that polite society does not use, right? And so as long as we do not use these certain words that we know we shouldn't say on our job or in front of our boss or our higher ups, we're not racist really, right? But really what we understand racism is a set or a body of institutionalized policies and procedures that produce outcomes that negatively affect people of color. And so I was really happy to get the invitation to work on this project, myself and Aaron, to really do our part to make sure that this conversation is happening, even though I think it's actually frightening, right, that this could just be a topic that could or could not be discussed, right? When we talk about actual people, we talk about these identities that are constantly experiencing this trauma, this oppression that we had to experience on a day-to-day basis.
As it was in school here in Kentucky, there was a discussion, is actually a story about yet another book that brought up these kinds of issues where a parent objected to the subject matter and some of the dialogue. I think it was specifically a passage in the book. There was a conversation between a child and his father, a Black child and his Black father, and somebody said they don't like Black people. And I think the parent got very upset. How are you prepared to handle that kind of backlash? And what is your response to that?
I think definitely ready for that backlash and that response. I think it's the right thing to do. It's the right time to do it. I don't think there's ever a time when you challenge white supremacy that it goes down quietly, right? It's gonna try to go down swinging. I think we have to have a firm commitment to doing what's right. And so definitely know that there will be some people who will be offended by this content. They will think it's unnecessary. They think it's just stirring up trouble. But I'm also hopeful that while there are folks who will be offended, I think I believe, I have the belief that there will be far more people who are interested and want to learn more and who want to come into a better understanding of our world, what it looks like for everybody, from multiple perspectives, and how they can do their part to make it a good place for everybody.
Aaron, was the age range for a specific purpose from like kids up from 6 to 10? Was that important?
Was that important? Yes, absolutely. I don't think that you can start having these conversations at a young enough age. I think it's very important and critically important that we begin to speak to our children about race and racism at a very young age. Plenty of studies have shown that children as young as toddlers have already started to absorb racial bias. I think it is a myth in our society that children are colorblind, and it's a myth used to disguise racism. And it's critically important if we expect that our children will become leaders in anti-racism, leaders in dismantling the systems of oppression in our country. It's important that we teach our children the skills to be anti-racist in their work. They are experiencing racism every single day. Racism is so deeply rooted that there is no escaping it in any aspect of our society. Our children experience racism, absorb it, not just from us, but from our media, from our curriculum that's taught in schools. So it is critically important that we give our young people the skills to become radical anti-racists.
I have a question from Old Soul. Where did it go? Oh, your son at 14, Mike, has your son had any encounters with police? Were they negative or positive?
Well, that's quite a fascinating question. He's not had an encounter in the sorts, to my knowledge, that represents having been accosted, having been profiled. He has had a unique experience with police officers in the sense that my wife is a part of the criminal justice reform movement and founded a court where officers have been present. And so there are persons in our family and in the community who are officers who he knows and who he respects. But he's also been very knowledgeable of the harm that has come because of officers. And he knows persons who have lost loved ones to police brutality. So he sits in a very interesting space where he's able to look in both directions. For instance, here in the city of Dallas, and included in the book, on July the 7th, 2016, many are aware of the 5 police officers in our city who were killed. I was one of the speakers on that night of the protest, was invited to come and address a crowd that had swelled after the death of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, and then was requested to help lead that impromptu march that followed. I offered that benediction, and as we were returning to our vehicles to depart is when gunfire began. And so my wife and I and our church members and others took cover, running for our lives, not knowing from which the bullets were coming, and then were awake for the next 46 hours as we addressed media from all over the world about that experience. But my son was very aware of that, not just for what was present in the book, but in journeying with us. Matter of fact, I remember all of our children actually sit in the back seat of our vehicle as we were moving from media post to media post, jumping out, daddy doing an interview, moving to the next place. And so then through that activism and work, he became even more intimately connected, again, with the families of those who have lost loved ones to police brutality. And I think that has impacted the type of questions that he asks and the way that he views the world, and even what he considers to be our responsibility to make it a better place. I think he's very cognizant of the fact that change doesn't happen simply through thoughts and prayers, but that you have to activate your actions. You know, you can have all the faith you want to, but faith without works is dead. And I think that that's really given him inspiration. So while he's not personally had this experience, unfortunately, he's well aware of many others who have had that. He said in churches, we've had vigils for those who have lost. He's been at more press conferences than he could maybe even desire to be at. He's been at the vigils and seen the tears fall from the faces of those who've lost loved ones. And I think all of that has informed not only his questions, but even his thinking about what we must do at this time.
Question from Carol. She says, I've not read the book yet, Dr. Waters, but how do you feel about using it for white 6 to 12-year-olds?
You know what I've loved seeing, and in fact, I will go on record and suggesting over the last week or so, tears have fallen from these eyes on more than one occasion. The beauty of the diversity of young children who have purchased the book and who are proudly holding it up. As a matter of fact, for everyone who's watching now, you can join that movement if you so desire. Take a selfie with the book, put the hashtag for beautiful Black boys. But if you investigate the hashtag right now, you'll see young Latino Americans, you'll see young Asian Americans, you'll see young African Americans, and yes, you'll see young European Americans holding up the book with pride, giving testimony to the fact of Black beautiful boys. It's a wonderful thing. And I really encourage white families. Have been very grateful for the number of white families who have informed that not only have they purchased the book, but they are reading it and using this exceptional, and I do mean exceptional, discussion and activity guide that's been created by the Ali Center. There are entire school districts that have purchased the book, schools that are engaged in it, diverse schools. They're inviting it and putting it as a part of their curriculum. What a gift, what an honor to be a part of something that I really think is going to have a tremendous impact and is having an impact in the lives of children. But absolutely, I would encourage white families to purchase the book and engage in dialogue concerning it.
Here's a question for all of you. Do children of color grow up with more fear? And if so, how do you think this affects their development? Daryl, I want you to tackle that one because you do a number of programs, youth programs there at the Ali Center, and they tend to be very frank with you. They talk to you. So yeah, give us your perspective.
So I'll actually do my perspective as a young person who's grown up in Louisville, and also how that's informed my interaction with our young people in the city. I can tell you, as a Black boy growing up, for me, it was very confusing why my parents were so strict all the time on certain things. You can't wear a hood inside of a store. You can't have your hands in your pocket when you go inside of a store. Slow down. It was all these things that I didn't understand why they were so strict about, and I couldn't get it. And they were like, "Well, we want you to come back home alive." And I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" As a 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, just doing the things that kids do, right? Just being a kid, and not really understanding, well, how come I couldn't have a hat on when the officer came by because you didn't want somebody to think you were affiliated with any kind of thing, right? So all these kind of codes that we didn't really understand as a person so young and not having the experience to when you're older, and then you start understanding, well, people are actually losing their lives. And you start having interactions. I know for myself personally, my first interaction with police officers that I can remember was actually being on the hood of a cop car because somebody thought I stole a TV, and having to have a neighbor come out and actually say, no, we had borrowed that TV from his family and he was taking it back home. And she was a white neighbor, so I don't know if she had intervened where I'd be now, and that was at 14. For the work I do with my kids now, they are much more, I think, due to the fact that there is so much social media and they are the social media generation, they are much more cognizant of what these things mean and why they are, and they've had their own experiences growing up, understanding the price that they can pay with racism, which can be their lives, right? So I do think it does definitely shape your perspective. It shapes how you operate and move. I think Aaron said it beautifully, is that you can't escape racism, right? There's no part of your life that's not touched by it. I think some people hear that and think that's hyperbole. But if we had an honest discussion, a frank discussion, and we don't have the time now, but if we were to do so, we could really go and just lay in, example after example in every facet of life and what that looks like.
Keisha?
And can you repeat the question?
Well, we were talking about children of color growing up with more fear and how it might affect their development and view of the world.
Listening to Daryl, I would definitely agree about, especially now, social media. As an adult, I look at Instagram, I look at Twitter, and in seeing all of that, like I can't imagine how, like someone said, crippling, and how that can really affect how you move through the world. For me, when I was growing up and I was younger, we didn't have social media, so that wasn't something I had to worry about. I could watch, my afternoon television shows and kind of get maybe a couple of shows that might talk about racism, and how it's dealt with in school. But other than that, that was kind of my exposure to that. But when you get it from social media and it's a constant, I can see how that would really affect the youth growing up now.
Erin, I hate to put you on the spot, but were you aware of this part of Black lives, that there is a whole kind of chasm of protective parents who school their children in ways that you probably didn't need to be schooled in? From the time they're able to walk and go out into the public, especially the boys, my brothers, I have 4 brothers and I have 3 sons. We all have to have the talk. Is that something that is common knowledge in the white world?
Growing up, the answer is no. No, I wasn't aware. I was theoretically aware of racism. I have wonderful, liberal, social justice minded parents, but did I have an education on race and racism, particularly systemic racism growing up? Absolutely not, because that's one of the functions of white privilege in our country. Your whiteness does not have to be identified as a race. Another brilliant author who talks about racism and talking to children, Ibram X. Kendi, I think he says something along the lines of denial is the heartbeat of racism. And I think that's fundamentally true, that one of the ways that racism continues to perpetuate in this country is that white people quite simply can choose not to talk about race and racism. They can live an existence where they believe that they are raceless, and race is something that belongs to people of color. It's why it's so critically important for educators, for parents, particularly white parents, for white educators to delve deeply into your own held implicit bias, your own racism, because we all carry racism with us, and to figure out how we're going to engage in deep dialogue, deep conversation, deep accurate learning within our classrooms and within our homes.
Beyond the book, this is a question from Tori. What tools do you recommend using to talk to kids about these issues besides the book? I mean, what tools can they, say, grab onto and use every day, would you say?
It's a wonderful question. I actually had the opportunity of writing a book chapter for a book called When Kids Ask Hard Questions. And the chapter I wrote was in particular about teaching kids, engaging kids around matters of race discrimination. And reality is that's a lesson that is enduring. It's an everyday class is open. And that happens through, one of the ways that happens is through exposing them beyond this book to other readings, to other manuscripts that engage matters of race, that engage the matters of this day. But also, I think it's important, it's imperative that we situate their lives in connection with women and men who have contributed greatly and courageously towards our progress. They need to know, as soon as they're able to know and understand, that we didn't just get to where we are today, even with all the issues that are facing us. And there's a multiplicity of issues that are still before us. There have been courageous persons in each generation that have worked tirelessly to move us forward. In hearing and reading those stories, I think it's a tremendous gift. And the gift of technology is you don't have to go very far to find those resources and make them available and make them a part of the ongoing ritual of your family or community to expose them to those realities. The other thing that I think is important, and I hope we're able to get back to it when COVID has moved on, or at least when we are able to protect ourselves more appropriately. But I founded years ago a civil rights pilgrimage to the Deep South, to cities and sites significant to the civil rights movement, and had the privilege of taking persons across the Deep South to Selma, Birmingham, Atlanta, you name it, Memphis, Little Rock, to engage with persons who were a part of that movement. And so our children, which may be challenging for some others to hear, but our children have stood at the very place where Emmett Till's body was brought up out of the water. That's a very harrowing experience, but it's very important for children to understand, particularly if you're talking about Black children, the harms that have come upon them for generations, right? We live in an era of Tamir Rice, where you have to instruct your child that even playing in the park with a toy gun can prove fatal for you because of your unique hue, all right? And so I think also, in addition to reading and engaging these stories, when it is at all possible, I think it's important to actually take children to these sites and to these places of historic memory to make the history real. And you don't even always have to leave from the city where you're in. I'm of the mindset that we have these experiences readily available most times within our own locales. We just have to mine them out and search them out.
Not only, again, you will hear this argument as well. There is not only violence against Blacks, African Americans, or men from police and others, but there is Black on Black crime. That is, it's in this city, especially Louisville, we're hitting a record number of homicides, and unfortunately, the majority of them are Black on Black crimes. What do you talk to your kids about that?
I think the first thing we do is we do away with the myth of Black on Black crime. It doesn't actually exist. When you look at the Department of Justice, what they note is that white people who are impoverished actually have a slighter, higher rate of violence and persons who are victimized by violence than Black persons who are impoverished. This is where we really get to the meat of teaching our children. It's not about simply the violence, it's about the violence of poverty, which comes up from historical import. Why do we have more concentrated communities of poverty that impact Black and brown people than any other community? Why is it that now, over 80 years since redlining first emerged in our nation, that 85% of those that were marked as best, those green areas, remain middle to upper class, and yet over 70% of the red areas, the red line areas, remain impoverished? Well, we understand that poverty is racialized and extends even beyond, frankly, it extends beyond the redlining era. We understand that the very social construct of race was created in the Enlightenment period, right? As a means of exploiting bodies for money, for wealth, as well as pleasure, right? Now, these are conversations that you have to nuance with children, but you can't start too early in trying to help them understand the world. So we have this misnomer that's been used for years, and many of us fell victim to it during the 90s and 80s. And now I think with greater information, I pray are moving in a different direction. There was this idea that Black people had some pathology, that there was something innate or inherent within them to lean into this violence. And we just know it's not the case. What we do know is that people who live in desperation are more likely to be victimized by others. And so then you have to ask a multiplicity of questions. Why are these persons in a desperation? And it brings us to the recognition that nothing is accidental, that these are These are incidences, these are realities that were created. And because they were created, it is a part of our work to decolonize our communities, right? And be about the work of resistance and reformation and reconstruction to build about a better day. So I always often want to give that caution because, you know, you will hear even Black communities who will talk about Black on Black crime, or they'll talk about, you know, I live in the hood, or they'll talk about kind of these broken window policies. But then we began stepping back and say, well, why is this the case? And the reality is the answer is the same. It's white supremacy, right? And until we actually address the issues of white supremacy, which inform every reality in every system and every institution in our nation, we can't actually make for a better world, right? And so I think that's important. Our hearts are aching for the harm that often happens within quote unquote minority communities, within urban communities. But I think it's also important that we are mindful of our language that we use when we talk about these realities, and that we also inform what created them.
You are talking about messaging and telling our story. I think we have allowed messaging to be told for us. Let me ask you about putting together this book. Was it difficult to find a publisher? Can the three of you talk, the four of you talk about how this all came together and how the Ali Center came to be a part of this?
Well, I tell you what, again, my publishing journey, I think has been fairly unusual. The book presented itself. I felt like we had something, and a wonderful friend named Laura I think I just made a post that I think I have a children's book. And I think she sent me a message saying, I'd like to see it. And I sent it to her. And maybe about 20 minutes later, she said, Mike, I've got tears in my eyes. This is something. I think I know a community that could embrace this. And that began my journey with first Westminster John Knox and ultimately with Flyaway Books, who have been tremendous in their support of this effort, in their courage to take on this subject matter in formalizing and creating the relationship with the Muhammad Ali Center. And what an honor. I think one of the great joys for me was when I received word that Lonnie Ali read the book and saw the early manuscripts. That gave me a great heart of joy because of the legacy of the great Muhammad Ali, because what he means to our international community, to know that she thought that this book could be representative of such an important name, an important legacy. And so again, it was just a journey. Many doors had opened. Ms. Morris came on. I saw her early artwork, and it was very clear that she was absolutely the one to bring this book to bear, to provide the type of visuals to support, uplift, and the words on the page. And then finally, once again, a tremendous, I can't say enough about the discussion guide and the activity guide and the work that went into creating this. It really would be, it will be, has been, will continue to be transformational in living rooms and classrooms across the country.
Keisha, tell us how you got pulled into it, and then tell us some of the interesting things you're working on now. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I got the manuscript. My agent sent it to me. I read it, and I felt like it was something that I definitely wanted to be a part of. I felt like it was a big topic. It was a heavy topic, but at the same time, I felt that it was a necessary topic. So when it came across my desk, I was just like, yes, this is it. Let's do this. From there, yeah, did the illustrations, and I'm so excited and proud of what we put together. I can't wait for, well, everybody's looking at it now since it's out, but just seeing all the feedback and like what Michael said, like all the little kids just holding up the book and embracing it and taking it in, that has been worthwhile for me. Just that's why I do this. That's why I'm a picture book illustrator.
Okay, now what are you working on? now?
Working on, right now I'm actually working on a book called Shut Down. It's with HarperCollins. It's co-written with Tamara Pizzoli and Yolanda Gladden. It's actually kind of a biopic of Yolanda Gladden's life, and it's pretty much about the 5-year shutdown of Black schools in Farmville, Virginia. And that it's pretty much following the Brown versus Board of Education case. And how they, like, after segregation happened, the schools in this town didn't want to have Black kids going to school with white kids. So they decided to just shut all the schools down. And then this caused Black families to have to then find other ways to educate their children. So that book actually means it's a lot to me, and I'm excited for it to come out.
Also very current. All right, Daryl, when you and Erin look at the book and come up with a teacher's guide, what kind of questions do you ask yourselves?
So I think our thought process was, how do we make sure it doesn't get watered down? I think that was my main concern. Like, I didn't want to just put something together that would make people comfortable, right? I wanted people to actually have to wrestle with what it means to address racism, right? I think for so often, a lot of cases that I was in growing up, racism was something that we didn't want to talk about. We wanted to, again, try to say it was all over. It's better now. You don't have to worry about it, and try to shift the conversation as fast as possible. So we really wanted to make sure that we did justice to such a great book that Dr. Waters and Keisha put together. We didn't want to come behind that with something that was going to seed the ground that had already made with the commentary that they provided. We really wanted to make sure we did the book justice, and also when we were putting the Muhammad Ali Center name, we had to make Muhammad proud, right? We talk about Muhammad being the Louisville Lip, and that wasn't just because he was so brash and braggadocious in the ring, but it's all because he was never afraid to speak truth to power. So we wanted to put something together that would live in that vein as well, but also make sense to a young person, right? Make sense to be adaptable for a young person, that they could understand and grapple. And also, I think we wanted to make sure that young people were heard in that book and in that portion, because I think a lot of times when we tell young people how to feel, and I think to everybody's point on the book already, to be a young Black person in America is a wild and crazy experience. And it comes with a lot of anger and pain. I think a lot of times we don't let young people have that, right? We just say, you have to be happy. You have to be happy and acceptive of what you deal with, because you are a young person. You are dictated to as a young person. And that's how you are looked at and pushed through life. And so we really wanted to make sure that we reminded teachers to actually honor the experiences of young people, to listen to them, to hear them, to provide space and platforms for them. So we had a lot to consider. I want to let Erin get in on this as well, but I think we just really wanted to make sure that it had as much punch as the book had.
Absolutely. And I think to Daryl's point, the other focus we had was in empowering young people and letting them understand their power to take action. The focus of so much of our work at the Muhammad Ali Center is about cultivating action-oriented radical leaders, young people who, like Muhammad, are not afraid of their age, are not waiting for the opportunity to vote, but can understand that they have power right now to go out and make change. If you look at Muhammad's biography, that period of his life between the ages of 16 and 24 is so dense as he's stepping onto the world stage, prepared to go out and to make change. So we value the energy, the creativity, the compassion, the willingness to be fearless in their action that young people bring to our world. It's part of Dr. Waters' book that we valued so much, that list that is provided through the dialogue with Jeremiah about all of the ways that young people can go out and make a change, make a difference in the world well before they're 18. So it was a really critical component for us that we bring forward the opportunity for young people to feel that they can look at all of the terrible, horrible, awful things in our world, but they can be empowered to go out and make them better. Another part of our process, I had the wonderful opportunity to read this book to my daughter, who was 6 years old at the time. And our dialogue in reading, it lent itself into the conversations and the questions and the dialogue that is in the parent teacher guide. Daryl and I had an amazing experience. We are so very, very proud to work on this important book. And we really do sincerely hope that it's a resource for our educators and for parents throughout not only our country, but throughout our world.
Here's a really important question from Facebook, because I think it impacts so many people. As white parents of 2 Black children, ages 19 and 10, what is the advice that we might not have thought of to discuss with them? The oldest has had several encounters with police last year on vacation. White people called police 3 times, reporting him while he was either shopping or ordering milkshakes. He's a 6'3" young man, a college athlete with a scholarship. It's so sad. People are scared and intimidated by his skin color and size. He's a gentle, intelligent young man. Thoughts?
I think you must be anti-racist yourself. There's a threat against your child. And you must take any and all necessary actions to ensure the safety of your child and other persons like him, right? I think that's the important point, is that this work doesn't happen at a distance. You have to be fully engaged. And this is now an invitation. You have a unique opportunity given your background and the background of your son and of your children. And so that would be my first point. I think the liberation, frankly, of our nation is going to happen in the white living room and the white sanctuary. I think those are 2 spaces that need to be liberated and informed with justice, and be freed ultimately from the mythology of white supremacy, this perception that hue, that pigmentation somehow gives you a greater level in life, right? That's a redeeming opportunity to be a part of that work. So that's a conversation I've actually had with a number of persons who are in a similar space. What do I do? And I think oftentimes the response that they're looking for, I'm not sure if this is in your case, but the response they're looking for is, what do I do to teach my child? And I've always turned that around and said, well, what are you going to do yourself to make things better, right? Not just to try to console your child. That's important. But what are you going to do? Now you have an invitation to be a part of this work, and you have a perspective that maybe few others have. And I think there may be even a calling and responsibility to become active in the work of anti-racism.
I would echo that. I think too often times the only response that racism and the experiences that Black people and people of color experience, the only reaction is sympathy. I think if we're talking about true liberation and freedom for Black folks, so that your son can live a life that he should be allowed to live, free from oppression, free from the threat of death. I think you have to figure out what space you want to occupy to combat racism. Whether that be, again, we talk about the power of voting, but also what are you doing to transform the spaces around you? What are you doing for your boardroom, where you work at? What are you doing for the places that you frequent, that you spend your dollars at? I think people hold a lot more power than they give themselves credit for. And really just thinking about all the places that you navigate and you come into contact with. What level of influence do you have? And then really committing yourself to using that influence to be an active anti-racist, right? So it's not just enough to say, I myself am not a racist, but I am willing to take an active participatory role in actually dismantling it.
Here's a question. CRT is under fire by the executive branch, and it appears that organizations that get federal funding will be particularly impacted by the directive to not offer training on white privilege and diversity training, and that's according to the Washington Post from yesterday. OMB memo from yesterday. Do you have any recommendations as to how we as a community can work to create safe spaces for discussion about race and privilege at this time?
I'll give a go at it. I mean, my initial response is to resist at all costs. You know, resist that harm, to attempt to provide a narrative that we already know has been harmful, right? Resist the harm, press against it, press against the school boards, press against what's happening on a federal level. This idea of a patriotic education, which we know, frankly, is simply a guise for, once again, teaching white supremacy. And this is a part of our history. Let's be honest. The reason we have generations upon generations of Americans who believe in the lost cause concerning the Confederacy was because the Daughters of Confederacy made sure that it was a part of the textbooks, right? This was not, again, accidental. There's a reason why in my own state of Texas only a few years ago, the textbook said called persons born into slavery, migrant workers. Isn't that fascinating, right? And sought to refashion the transatlantic slave trade as the triangular trade route, right? These are harms. These are attacks on the very intelligence and lessons that are needed for our children in order to do the work that these times demand. And so I'd say press against it at all costs. That's one of the tools of white supremacy is miseducation. We've always known that, right? And that's what's manifesting in these days. So we ought not be surprised by it. We've seen this chapter again and again. We've already seen this episode. What we have to do is we've got to press against it. We've got to get involved. And then to the point, we've got to create liberating spaces. And again, I think the greatest space you can create is a space that you can control. And that is your home. That may be your classroom. That may be your Sunday school room. That may be your mosque. That may be your synagogue. You know, that wherever that space is, make sure you're transforming that space and that you are speaking the truth. A fascinating thing is that children very early are very perceptive and discerning. And I believe they are familiar with what spaces are safe and those that are not. And I think we have to create them at all costs. But beyond that, resist at all costs. I mean, these things will continue to happen. These ideals will continue to be forced upon us. The attacks against the 1619 Project, all these things will continue if we allow them to be so. Here's the secret of this book. I'll give it to you right now. It's subversive. It's accessible to you, but it's subversive. Should you dare to pick it up and open its pages, I believe you'll be confronted by realities that will demand you to take action. And these are the things we want children to see. We want them to be inspired. Think about this. Think about all the persons, unfortunately, that that have departed us today, and think this year, and think about the image that drew them into movement. The great John Lewis, experiencing what happened to Emmett Till as the invitation to movement. There are young people all over this country that for them, whether it be Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, they've had that Emmett Till moment, which has beckoned them to the cause of justice. Now they need the resources to help guide them and lead them to what might actually be their life's calling.
Another question. This is a powerful, compelling book, and I find its educational power scope goes beyond children. I have been moved as an adult. Would you share a word on the impact of this book as an educational tool for adults? Michael.
I'd be happy to. I was going to lean to the writers of the guide. This
or Daryl, either one, or Keisha.
I'll simply say this. They've done such an extraordinary job with this guide. I have had one of the frequent refrains that I've received from those who reviewed the book early to the parents that have read it with their children is that they have been just as moved, if not more moved, than their children, that this has been almost a spiritual experience, right? And so I think it has great meaning and value for adults, right? I think the same subject matter and the encouragement that's provided in the book will be received by persons regardless of their age and background. You don't have to be a Black boy to value this book and take something out of it. I will say there's something very powerful about seeing Black young boys holding up this book and embracing it tightly and seeing their shoulders squared and their chin lifted because they see themselves celebrated in this book in a way that maybe they're not frequently celebrated. But it is accessible to all persons, and I think it has just as much an impact on parents or trusted adults as anyone else.
Okay, we have to go there. So I wonder if any of your children were watching last night's show. And what do you tell them?
Well, this is in our household, I'll never forget, and this is actually part of a book I'm writing currently. This has, led to other texts. I'll never forget our daughter picking her up from school. I think she was in first grade. And she climbs in the back of the vehicle as she normally does, sits down, puts on a seatbelt, and says, "Hi, Daddy." I said, "Hey," the next question she says is Donald Trump going to send us back to slavery? So let's really wrestle with that reality. We have children who are aware of other children in cages. We have children who are aware of other children who have been abducted from their families. And now we have children who watched as the sitting president of the United States of America implored white supremacists to stand down, but to stand by. These are very harrowing times. And, what I've seen personally throughout social media was of parents who were appalled, but of children who are also disgusted and trying to make sense of adults who behave in way. And let's be honest, let's stop insulting children by claiming that they are representative of the insanity of these adults. This is not like behavior, right? This is something of another kind, right? And so I think in that regard, circling back to For Beautiful Black Boys, the truth telling of the book is imperative because it accompanies what these children are seeing and have been seeing for some time. We've got an entire generation of young people who have dealt with Black Lives Matter. They have dealt with a young man going into a church in Charleston and killing 9 people. They've seen young Latino boys and girls placed in cages. They've seen marches in the streets of Charlottesville that resulted in the death of Hare the Higher. And they've seen it happen, in succession, okay? So we have to value that experience. My son, and it's included in the book, I think one of the most breathtaking questions he ever asked me as I was on my way to speak was, who died now? That weighs on me. That there is almost an expectation and anticipation that somebody's going to die. And because of that, I think it's just important we have very honest conversations. And so a part of that is, watching last night's attempt at a debate and then having a conversation about it, which we held in our household. What does this mean? Who are the Proud Boys? What do they do? I think we all have to engage in that. We can't run away from these conversations. We have to lean into them, and we have to prepare our children not only for what they're facing today, but for the work that it will take to actually create the better world we all desire.
Oh, I'm thinking about a comment my father used to make to me all the time is, if there were younger children in the house and I was playing with them, or like a really young infant, and usually you do the goo goo gaga, and he said, why are you doing baby talk? Use actual words. You're not helping them at all by giving them this nonsense. You're not helping their vocabulary expand. You're not doing them any justice by trying to not speak to them. And I think the same thing holds true with young people. I think we have this idea of trying to protect them, but we're not doing them any kind of protective service by not letting them understand what's really going on in the world, the really real traumatic things that are happening and are on the horizon. And I think we also have to be honest too. I think a lot of, for the outrage and discuss, I think we have to be honest. I think a lot of people are only outraged at the behavior. And when I say behavior, as a performance. But for a lot of people, if that would have been more sophisticated, they would have batted an eye. But there are some really real traumatic, heinous acts being committed in our country right now. And we have to prepare our young people. Before this call, you know, Aaron and I were conducting our youth meeting with our young people and gave them the space to process what they had witnessed last night. And for a lot of them, they peeled back the layers of the quote unquote nastiness, right, and the childishness of the participants, but really talked about what's really happening beneath that. And I think for so many people who are commenting on the discourse is only because, oh, I can't believe how uncouth they were, unprofessional, but really we have to, as a country, wrestle with what was actually at stake and was of substance. You know, to Dr. Waters' points, there are children in cages right now. There is a pandemic that's claimed over 200,000 lives, but still be treated as a political affiliation, whether or not you decide to wear a mask or not. So I think we have to have really real, frank, honest conversations with our young people about what was said on the stage and not just how it was said.
So Lizzie wants to know, she says, I know there's a teacher's guide, but are there any plans for some professional development or a conference specifically for educators with a discussion and plan for implementation of anti-racial curriculum? And Daryl, can you address that? Because I know you guys do some things at the Ali Center.
I'm actually going to pass that to Aaron, but I can say one of the things that we have done is that we recently implemented some DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings for organizations who are looking to make this a part of their work. I think just to kind of piggyback a little bit to Dr. Waters' previous comment is that we have to resist at all times, right? I think this kind of work and the seeking of this kind of work usually comes up around when we have a national incident, like one of these really high publicized shootings or murders, which I actually call them murders, like a Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. But really this work has to be pertinent in your organization all year round, even when there is no perceived national event that calls for the attention. So even if we are threatening to subvert critical training such as the 1619 Project and things of that nature, I think it's incumbent upon organizations to actually see the merit in this kind of work, to be anti-racist, to be anti-sexist, to be anti-homophobic, and all the antis and all the things that we need to break down and dismantle in this country. I think we really have to instill them and make them a line item every single year, not just in February for Black History Month, or not just in Women's History Month, or any kind of those months, but really, how are you making your organization, your house of faith, your educational institution, how are you making it anti-ism and anti-racist? And I'll let Aaron talk about what we're doing with that as well.
Yeah, one of the areas of focus for our work is on educator professional developments. The Muhammad Ali Center, we always strive to be a very strong partner for our public schools, all of our schools and our teachers. So we do professional developments throughout the year. What's been interesting about this pandemic, our professional developments have by and large been in person. We are shifting those to a virtual platform. So pay attention to our website, continue to check back, and you're going to see a menu of professional developments that will be available virtually. So we'll be able to reach teachers around our country or around our world. Also, one of the interesting developments coming out of the Muhammad Ali Center is a new curriculum that corresponds to social studies core content standards. It's a Muhammad Ali curriculum that's really grounded in critical conscious pedagogy. And it's about helping young leaders, young people develop into socially just-minded young leaders, using Muhammad's biography, his history as a boxer, as a social justice leader, as a humanitarian, as the foundation of that curriculum. That tool is in its final stages of development. It will be fully digital and it will be available, and we will be doing extensive professional developments with that as well.
Wonderful. Well, Thank you all. Dr. Waters, again, I didn't give you a minute to kind of tell us what you're doing now. You're always involved and engaged. Give us some idea of what you're doing, what you're up to.
Well, on the part of writing, I have a new book coming out at the turn of the year entitled Something in the Water, 21st Century Civil Rights Odyssey, which I was invited to speak for a festival that Pharrell Williams had in Virginia Beach. And I addressed a crowd, about 5,000 people on the beach, which is very interesting because it was leading up to the 400th anniversary of the arrival of our ancestors upon these shores in that particular state. We're only about 100 miles away from those first 20 Africans who came off of the ship. And really using that as an image and cycling it back throughout our activism throughout the year, the book was created. And so check that out, coming out in January 2021. I also have another children's book with Flyaway Books entitled Liberty Civil Rights Road Trip, which will be out this time next year, which will be invitation to young people to dig deep into the civil rights history of our nation, to hopefully provide them yet another path to get involved. Have another book entitled Hope's Heart, which talks about other ableness. And I'm hoping that persons will look out for that, and a few others that are in various levels of completion. So that continues on. Of course, I'm telling any and everybody that I can to vote. We're mobilizing as a worship community in our city to help persons in the vote. And then also we have been doing quite a bit of work regarding COVID, providing grants to our community, helping with grocery assistance, providing free PPE to the community at large, along with partners. And so there's just so much work to be engaged in at this day and time, life-saving, life-giving work. And I would encourage everyone to find the place that you are uniquely gifted for to help advance the work. There is some place for you, believe it or not. Matter of fact, there's probably some community that's waiting on you to bring your genius and brilliance to bear to help to bend the arc towards justice. Because the arc only bends towards justice if you bend it. And this is the invitation to be a part of that bending work.
And Erin and Daryl, are you all open to more books from the Ali Center collaboration for children with other topics too? It seems like it's a nice match.
Absolutely. Don't you think so,
100%.
Daryl? 100%.
All right. And Keisha, we're going to be looking for your beautiful illustrations as well. So
Thank you so much.
keep up the good work there and keep those folks decent in Nevada. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there's a book giveaway attached to our program tonight, and I am excited to announce that the following 5 people have won a copy of 4 Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. And they are Emily Mandela, Erica James, Jennifer Philpy, I hope I'm pronouncing these names right, Molly Castile, and Onith Grizzle. Congratulations to all of you. A team member from Flyaway Books will email each of you after our event tonight to confirm your mailing address. So please keep an eye out for their email. Thank you all so much. Thank you, the panelists. This is a very enlightening discussion, a wonderful book. We look forward to more. For the attendees who are there, thank you for joining us again. Please make it a point to go to the Ali Center website, log on to see some of the exhibits that are there, and make a trip to Louisville. Come and see it. Come to the center. It is amazing if you've not been here. It is. Thank you all very much. And I think we can say good night. Have a safe evening, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
I'll be there in